Max Verstappen crossed the finish line, and everyone thought the Austrian Grand Prix had already given its verdict. Then the FIA stepped in after the race, and suddenly, one moment of contact with Lewis Hamilton became a threat to something much bigger than a race result. Because this is not just about two cars touching. This is about Verstappen's most powerful weapon, the pressure, the squeeze, the refusal to give rivals comfort, being placed under official investigation. And that is dangerous. If the FIA clears him, every driver on the grid learns that Verstappen's hardest racing is still inside the line. But if the FIA punishes him, it could force the most feared defender in Formula One to change the very thing that made him almost untouchable. Hamilton knows what this means. Verstappen knows it too. Because when these two collide, the question is never only who was ahead. The real question is whether Formula One is protecting hard racing, or finally drawing a line Verstappen can no longer cross. And the answer could change the next wheel-to-wheel fight before it even begins. Subscribe to the channel. Austria is the kind of place where Formula One arguments do not need a huge crash to explode. They only need one touch. One closing gap. One driver who refuses to move, and another who refuses to disappear. That is why Verstappen's contact with Hamilton instantly became more than a small racing moment. Because on a track like the Red Bull Ring, every battle feels compressed. The lap is short. The braking zones come quickly. The corners arrive before the tension has time to settle. And when two cars start fighting there, the pressure does not fade. It stacks. A driver defends once, then has to defend again. A driver attacks once, then has to decide if the next move is worth even more risk. And when the two names are Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, that risk carries history. This is the part that makes Austria so dangerous. From the outside, the circuit looks simple. It does not look like the kind of place where a tiny decision can become a major FIA question. There are no endless street walls. There is no maze of corners where drivers vanish from sight. It looks clean, fast, and easy to understand. But that is the illusion. Because simple tracks often create the clearest conflicts. There is less room for excuses. Less room to hide. Less room for a driver to say the moment was too complicated to judge. When contact happens in Austria, the question becomes painfully direct. Who had the space? Who lost the space? And who made the decision that turned pressure into contact? That is the real beginning of the investigation. Not the touch itself. The choice before the touch. Because in Formula One, contact is rarely born at the exact moment the wheels meet. It usually begins earlier, in the way a driver positions the car, in the way the rival reads the gap, in the split second where both decide they have the right to keep going. That is where Verstappen is so difficult to judge. His whole racing identity is built around making those moments uncomfortable. He does not simply defend a corner. He makes the corner feel smaller. He makes the rival feel like the decision has to be made now, not later. He turns an overtake into a test of nerve, and for most drivers, that is where the battle is already lost. But Hamilton is not most drivers. Hamilton has spent his career surviving exactly those tests. He knows when a gap is real. He knows when a defender is trying to make him doubt it. He knows when backing out is smart, and when backing out means handing the other driver control of every battle that follows. So when Hamilton stays in a fight with Verstappen, it is never casual. It is a statement. And when contact follows, the entire sport leans in, because everyone understands that this is not just two drivers meeting at the wrong place. This is two racing philosophies colliding. Verstappen's philosophy is brutal in its clarity. Take the space. Own the moment. Make the rival choose. If they hesitate, the corner is yours. Hamilton's philosophy is more layered. Read the danger. Measure the risk. Place the car where the rules should protect you, then force the other driver to respect that you are there. Both styles have created championships. Both styles have created controversy. And in Austria, the FIA now has to decide what happens when those two styles meet and the space between them disappears. That is why this post-race investigation matters so much. Because if the FIA only looks at the final contact, the story feels too simple. Two cars touched. One driver may be blamed. The other may be defended. Fans argue, social media burns, and the sport moves on. But the FIA cannot afford to stop there. The stewards have to look at the chain of decisions. Where was Verstappen before the contact? Where was Hamilton when the gap started to close? Was there a fair amount of racing room? Was one driver already committed? Could either driver reasonably avoid what happened, or had the move already trapped them both? Those questions are not just technical. They are emotional, because they decide how fans remember the moment. If Hamilton had earned the right to space, then the contact feels like he was forced into an impossible position. If Verstappen had control of the corner, then the contact feels like the consequence of Hamilton refusing to yield. And if both drivers had a claim, then the incident falls into the gray area Formula One fears most. The gray area where nobody is fully innocent, but nobody is clearly guilty. That is where the FIA's decision becomes powerful. Because Formula One is not only judging the past, it is shaping the future. Every ruling becomes a message to the grid. Every penalty, every clearance, every sentence in an official decision tells drivers how far they can go next time. If Verstappen is cleared, defenders will hear it clearly. You can keep the pressure high. You can hold your ground. You can make the attacker prove they truly own the space. But if Verstappen is punished, attackers will hear a different message. If you are alongside, that matters. If you earn room, the defender must respect it. And even a driver with Verstappen's reputation cannot turn a fair fight into a disappearing gap. That is why the stakes are bigger than Austria. This is about the invisible rulebook drivers carry inside their heads. Not just the written regulations, but the living code of what will be tolerated when two cars are side by side and neither driver wants to surrender. That code decides overtakes before they happen. It decides whether a driver attacks boldly or hesitates. It decides whether a defender leaves a margin or closes the door with absolute confidence. And Verstappen has mastered that code better than almost anyone. He knows how to live right at the edge without always stepping over it. He knows how to make rivals feel the cost of challenging him. He knows how to make a driver ask themselves one terrible question in the middle of a corner. Is this worth it? That question is one of Verstappen's greatest weapons. But now, because the FIA has opened the investigation after the race, the same question turns back toward him. Was his pressure worth it? Was the squeeze worth it? Was the risk worth the possibility that the stewards may now draw the line differently? And that is the first major crack in this story. Because Verstappen's dominance has never been only about speed. It has been about certainty. The certainty that he will not make life easy. The certainty that if you attack him, you will feel every inch of resistance. The certainty that he will take a battle to the limit, and trust himself to know exactly where that limit is. But when the FIA investigates after the race, it challenges that certainty. It tells the driver, the team, and the entire grid that the limit may not be where Verstappen thought it was. That does not mean he is guilty. It means the question is serious enough to matter. And with Hamilton involved, serious becomes explosive. Because Hamilton is one of the few drivers whose presence can turn a Verstappen defense into a global debate. He has the experience, the reputation, and the history to make every piece of contact feel like evidence in a much larger case. Some fans will say Hamilton should have backed out. Others will say Verstappen should have left more room. But the deeper truth is more uncomfortable. Both drivers may have believed they were right. And in Formula One, that is often when the most dangerous moments happen. Not when a driver is confused. Not when a driver panics. But when two champions arrive at the same piece of track with absolute belief that it belongs to them. That is what Austria exposed. A battle for space, yes. A battle for responsibility, definitely. But underneath all of it, a battle for the meaning of hard racing itself. And the next part of the story is where the pressure shifts away from the drivers and lands directly on the FIA. Because now the governing body has to make a decision that will satisfy almost nobody, but teach everyone something. The pressure now moves from Verstappen and Hamilton to the FIA. And that is where this story becomes even more dangerous. Because drivers can explain their side. Teams can argue. Fans can choose who they believe. But once the incident becomes a post-race investigation, the FIA has to turn a chaotic racing moment into one official answer. And that answer will not only judge what happened in Austria. It will teach the entire grid what is allowed next. That is why the wording matters. Not just the decision. The wording. Because Formula One teams do not treat FIA decisions like casual announcements. They study them. They break them down. They look for patterns, for signals, for the smallest hint of how the stewards are interpreting racing room, responsibility, and avoidable contact. A single sentence can become a warning. A single phrase can become a weapon. A single decision can change how a driver defends into the next braking zone. And that is the hidden power of this investigation. It is not only about Verstappen's past move. It is about every future move that may now be shaped by it. Because if the FIA decides that Verstappen's contact with Hamilton was within the limits of hard racing, the message travels instantly through the paddock. Defenders will feel stronger. They will know that pressure, even uncomfortable pressure, can still be protected if the move is judged as part of normal racing. They will believe they can hold their ground longer, close the space more firmly, and demand that the attacking driver either complete the move cleanly or back out before the risk becomes too high. That is one version of Formula One. Raw, tense, unforgiving. A sport where the bravest drivers are rewarded for refusing to surrender. But if the FIA decides Verstappen crossed the line, the message becomes completely different. Then every driver hears that racing room must mean something. Being alongside must mean something. And no driver, not even the most feared defender in the sport, can use pressure so aggressively that the rival is left with no safe answer. That is another version of Formula One. Still fierce. Still fast. Still emotional. But with a clearer boundary between racing hard and forcing contact. And this is why the FIA is trapped in a difficult position. If it is too soft, critics will say Verstappen has been allowed to turn aggression into protection. They will say the rules bend around the biggest names, and that drivers who fight him are forced to choose between losing position or risking damage. If it is too strict, critics will say the FIA is draining the fight out of the sport. They will say Formula One asks drivers to battle wheel to wheel, then punishes them when the battle becomes real. Both reactions are waiting. No matter what the FIA decides, one side will feel betrayed. That is the impossible balance. Formula One wants hard racing, but it also wants fairness. It wants emotion, but it also wants consistency. It wants drivers to fight like warriors, but judge them like lawyers after the flag. And when the drivers are Verstappen and Hamilton, that balance becomes even harder. Because this is not a normal rivalry. This is a rivalry with memory. The moment their cars get close, people stop watching only the track. They start watching history. They remember old battles, old controversies, old decisions, old wounds that never fully healed. That history makes every judgment heavier. The FIA may insist it is looking only at Austria, only at this contact, only at the evidence in front of it. But the world around the investigation is not that clean. Fans bring history. Teams bring strategy. Drivers bring reputation. And Verstappen brings one of the most debated racing styles of the modern era. That is why this investigation carries a kind of psychological weight. Verstappen's strength is not just that he is fast. It is that he makes other drivers uncomfortable. He places his car with such conviction that rivals feel the decision being forced onto them before the corner has even finished. Attack him, and you may find the door closing. Defend against him, and you may find him already where you did not expect him to be. Race him, and you cannot assume he will give you comfort. That is what makes him extraordinary. But it is also what makes the FIA's decision so important. Because if the sport officially accepts that kind of pressure in this moment, Verstappen's approach becomes even more powerful. It tells him that the edge is still his territory. It tells his rivals that if they enter a fight with him, they must be prepared for the full force of his style. But if the FIA pushes back, the effect is different. It does not simply punish a moment. It challenges a method. It tells Verstappen that even his most effective weapon has limits. It tells rivals that the rules may protect them if they truly earn space. And it tells the rest of the grid that aggressive reputation does not erase responsibility. That is the part that could change everything. Because drivers do not need a rulebook in their hands to feel a shift. They feel it in briefings. They feel it in decisions. They feel it when a move that once seemed safe suddenly becomes risky. And once a driver feels that shift, it can enter the car with them. Not loudly. Not obviously. But it sits there, inside the next battle. A driver thinks twice before squeezing. A rival stays in the fight a fraction longer. A team tells its driver over the radio to be careful, because the stewards are watching these moments differently now. That is how a post-race investigation can reach beyond the race itself. It becomes a shadow over future combat. For Hamilton, that shadow matters too. Because he has spent years mastering the art of surviving in uncomfortable spaces. He knows when to push. He knows when to wait. He knows when to place his car in a way that forces the other driver to prove they can defend fairly. Against Verstappen, that skill becomes essential. Hamilton understands that if he disappears every time Verstappen applies pressure, Verstappen wins the psychological battle before the racing battle is even complete. But if Hamilton stays, and contact happens, then everything depends on whether the FIA believes his presence deserves protection. That is the emotional core of the incident. Did Hamilton have to vanish because Verstappen made the space uncomfortable?